Welcome to the Monday, December 12th, 2011 meeting of the Brattleboro Planning Commission. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The agenda review, as you can see, what we're up to tonight is discussing two main topics. One is the housing chapter, and the other is the draft of the active living workshop report. So the first order of business is to approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was November 24th. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Seconded? Okay. Any discussion?
Are we talking about economic development anymore? Are we done tonight?
Not tonight,
Not tonight, yeah.
but we probably will again.
Are there any extra handouts of this? Because I only had it on the computer. Of
Oh, the packet? Sure.
Tonight's packet?
Yep.
Thanks. Hopefully no one from the public will show up.
Thanks for including the overhead.
Oh, you're welcome.
That was nice to have.
The last bullet point in H says the next meeting is January 9th, 2012. Is that the next meeting of SEVIDS, or what is that the next meeting of?
I think it's the next meeting of the ERB, so we can have a joint meeting after the second, because we thought the second was too close.
No, it's
Yeah.
our meeting.
that would
It's
be
the
our
second.
planning
It's the
commission
second.
Oh,
I don't know what it's the second of, to be honest.
The second meeting in second Monday in January. We meet on
How's
the
that?
second and the
I
fourth.
wasn't paying attention then
Well,
or now.
maybe it was
But
next
today is the
discuss
next
it.
meeting.
Maybe it's that we're next discuss economic development in January.
Okay. Well, we'll say the next
Needs some
meeting that we
attention.
discuss economic development will be January 9th, 2012.
Oh, that would, yeah, that depends on
Good save.
Santa bringing things for economic development. That's great.
So we'll
So
change
that's our next
that to that.
meeting, though, right?
Yes.
All right.
Well, this is our next meeting. I guess. You know,
No more after
technically,
today.
Oh, it's getting
we're
worse.
getting very philosophical here.
But-
We're here till 8 or 8:30.
8 today.
Yes.
8.
Let's get that straight right now.
I
So-
got that.
So
I don't have to worry
anyway-
about January 9th.
So anyway, are we saying that that's the next meeting that
Yeah.
where we will
That's-
discuss economic
Yes.
development is?
I
Okay,
think that's what it meant.
cool. All right, anything else? I would put the bullet 2 above that, Hannah Grimes Incubator Model, and just put in Keene there, I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
All right,
the
yes.
person reading this might not have any idea what that is. I am done with my
Good
comments.
point.
Anybody else have anything to bring up? All in favor of approving these minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Announcements. One announcement that I had was that I saw that the Transportation Committee is meeting on Thursday night at 7:30.
Thursday night or Thursday morning?
Oh, Thursday morning. When it says 7:30, I think of meetings at night.
They meet at 7.
It's
No, there's a
transportation.
meeting in the evening.
Is it?
Molly Burke's going to be some kind of,
Is that one?
Complete street?
no,
meeting?
no, it's a transportation money meeting with a panel or something. It is Thursday
Really?
in the evening.
Well, this said Transportation Committee meeting, and I mainly wrote it down because I don't know what the Transportation Committee is.
Yeah, well,
What is that?
I think it's the thing that oversees the parking garage and stuff.
Oh, really?
It's not traffic safety.
No,
So,
but
I don't know.
And wouldn't that be a parking committee?
I don't know. They do use a euphemism for it. I'm not sure why.
huh.
Do you want me to investigate and then forward something to the planning commission amendments over email? I saw
Well-
it today and just didn't want to like.
I just had
pursue
never
it.
heard of the transportation committee before.
Well, there was that
so,
issue.
yeah, I was just curious because
15th.
I'm the big mouth that keeps saying that
All
the
right.
traffic safety committee should be changed to something else.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
if that's
guess they did
something
it,
else,
Gary.
huh?
I guess they did it.
Well, yeah, pretty fast, huh?
Yeah. Your
I
wish is
guess
their command.
if
From
that
your
thing
mouth.
already, yeah, right, into the gutter. So that was my only announcement, and I think Carolina has some
I do.
announcements.
There's another, Conservation Commission is having
Yes.
a meeting tomorrow night that's open to the public called Understanding the Effects of Hurricane Irene. So it'll be about flooding and fluvial erosion and whatnot, and it'll be at 6 p.m. tomorrow night at Marlboro Grad Center. And I think that'll be interesting.
6, you said?
Yes, 6 p.m.
Okay.
tomorrow, which is the 13th.
Anything else? Over on this side of the counter, or whatever this is. Okay.
Called a trapezoid.
The
Dais.
half trap. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
The dais, yeah. It's a Harry Belafonte song.
It's Deo.
Oh, okay. That's all too. Okay. No more announcements. Any announcements from the planning department? Thank you so much.
This is the last meeting for 2011.
Gosh, where's the sparkling cider and so forth?
Yeah, really.
Okay. So we have do we have other business? Anybody have any other business? No. And we have no public to comment. And we're not live. Okay, so I guess they won't be coming through that door in response to anything we say tonight.
That would be good.
So the next item that's active is discussion of the housing chapter. And I'm trying to think how we most successfully have done this in the past. It seems like what we may want to do is, Sue, could you kind of give us the hits and highlights? What you wish you had done?
Okay, well, it's not complete. You probably can tell. There's lots of incomplete sentences. There's a time
Yes.
crunch.
It's funny.
But I think it's further along than the last version. Let's see where to start.
Well, one place to start, I think, would be to just point out that this email is a good intro, I think, to the subject for people. The one from
Byron.
Bob Oser
Yeah.
that has this is a synopsis of the talk that Byron Stuckey gave to the Citizens Breakfast on November 18th.
Who is Rob Oser?
He's the guy, I think, that he organizes the Citizens Breakfast, doesn't he, Bob
Yeah.
Oster? Yeah. And I'm not sure.
You probably know him by sight. He's out and about.
Yeah.
I just wondered whether he worked for the town.
No.
No.
This particular meeting of the Citizens Breakfast was recorded by BCTV, and it might still be being shown. I'm not sure. I caught it one day, and it was good. Interesting.
C3C.
I have had the
Yeah.
privilege of working with Byron for about 6 or 7, 8 years now on the Affordable Housing Board, and Byron is all about housing. He is an incredible resource for the town in terms of housing statistics and action and ideas and so forth. And he's kind of the unpaid executive director of the Brattleboro Area Affordable Housing Corp. And so that was Byron that presented this, or that made this presentation to the Citizens Breakfast. He's kind of seen the whole scene for about the last 12, 13 years, I think, something like that in town.
Well, I have some comments. Shall I begin?
Yes.
Well, I thought this was very nice, but kind of skewed towards affordable housing. So I would like it to have elements of market housing in here, and kind of where the town would like to see the market housing located that would tie into our land use sections, which talk about what we were thinking about floodplain control and the sustainability elements of locating housing further east of town. And it might also be nice to have a little section that talks about all the different committees and elements that the town has focused on housing, either affordable housing or regular housing, but there seems to be an awful lot of groups that do this work, and it would be nice to have a little index of them. And on page 5, when you're talking about the assessment, assessed value to market value, you might want to mention that the town has recently had a reassessment, so those values are pretty high for assessed values. And then on page 7, when you talk about the flooding, you might want to talk more about the flooding, because it was so
no, that was
devastating.
That was an area.
Yeah.
That was not complete.
Yeah. And does Morningside run a shelter?
There is a Morningside shelter, but it's not the same location as the Morningside condo complex.
Right. Because
Right, right next
on
door, but-
page 8, you talk
In the
about
same-
the drop-in center and the,
Right.
and so,
The drop-in center's different from the Morningside shelter.
yes, I know, but
Yeah.
that there's also a shelter that Morningside runs.
That's up above it. The
Right.
sentence above it.
Oh,
It's in there.
there you go.
It straddles page 7 and 8.
Okay. And then under zoning tools on page 9, again, you might want to list all the various good reasons why we would want to steer housing towards the eastern end of the town.
Eastern, yeah, and
Where are you referring to when you say eastern?
New Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean,
Houseboats.
As opposed to the western end of the town, where there were all the
Right, yeah.
problems for flooding, like along Route 9.
And where that's more
The
remote.
outlets of the road along Route 9, and kind of more isolated housing in rural areas.
Over
So
here,
generally,
instead of
east
over
of
there.
91,
Yeah.
that's generally, there's some areas that are a little bit west of 91 that,
When we had the meeting
Have the
about the
infrastructure.
aftermath of Irene, Sue had a whole bunch of really good elements about how to locate housing that wouldn't be so
yes,
vulnerable.
I remember that. I guess when I think of eastern, I think of the green, or not, the Connecticut River. So I do remember that.
That was the reference to New Hampshire. So, but yeah, I guess if you look
So
at a map,
east of 91.
if you look,
Okay.
yeah, if you look at a map, like one of the maps we've got on our wall,
Mhm.
one thing that stands out is that apart from the route, what could be referred to as the Route 9 corridor, practically all the development in Brattleboro is east of 91. So 91 sort of forms like a little ring road.
Right, okay.
And so it's kind of a decision about whether to keep it east of 91 or let it, or keep on adding on to the Route 9 corridor.
Okay,
And Route 9 itself has proved pretty vulnerable.
yeah.
Can we take that a
Okay,
step further
thank you.
and say to encourage it around the map that you made, Sue, with the little nodes on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll
Yeah.
link to that, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else has comments?
I have a question. So when we're having all of these discussions, we're talking about, oh, there isn't a market for more housing. And when I was talking to Connie Snow, who runs the Wyndham Housing Trust, and she was saying that there aren't a lot of available units. The occupancy rate is pretty high in Brattleboro. So if I don't know how you can encourage more housing, but is there a way? I guess is there a way to do so it's not so it's a little more competitive? If it's hard to find an apartment, people can charge whatever they want.
Yeah, that's
So
where
this-
we are now is,
Okay.
yeah, is that, no, I'm agreeing with you. That's where we are now is that the rent rates are going up or have gone up because there's such a scarcity of apartments.
Yes.
So,
Well,
What-
actually, the rental rates have, sorry, go ahead, continue.
What types of apartments are going to make this more competitive, I guess? You know what I mean? Are these handicap accessible apartments? Are these geared towards elderly housing? Are they single families? Are they studios? Are they for
Well, the report does talk about incentives to build these types of units, affordable housing units within regular market development, but there's such a scarcity of demand for market housing as well, that in general, I think what this section is trying to do is to encourage housing on both fronts.
Right. We have really puzzled with this a lot in the office and tried to come at it from various directions, including talking to the listers. And I haven't sorted out my thinking on this at all, so these are all statements that I might take back in a minute. One view is that affordable housing, you can think of there being a market for affordable housing, and that's dominated by the big suppliers, which would include Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, Brattleboro Housing Authority, not-for-profits like that. And they are fairly large in Brattleboro and control significant amounts of stock. So the market for affordable housing is strong from those big providers, the not-for-profits, as well as private landlords that cater to a similar demographic in terms of people's income levels. On the other end of the spectrum, the market for market rate rentals, condos such as the Morningside or something similar, relatively new stock with fairly easy you can enter and leave relatively easily, or home ownership of the same kind of stock or homes, is not very competitive. There's not an obvious excess demand, and there's not a whole lot of supply, and that would be demonstrated by the very small amount of new home construction of any kind in Brattleboro. So whether it be apartments or condos or townhouses or freestanding family dwellings or anything like that. We've had 11 permits issued, zoning permits issued for for residential units this year. You know, so what I'd say is, what confounds us is it's sort of a chicken and the egg problem. I'm not sure if people who get jobs in the area find market rate housing outside of Brattleboro more readily, and therefore that's where they end up. And it could be Chesterfield, or it could be Guildford or Vernon or whatever. Or whether Brattleboro needs to create more jobs and economic activity that would attract more people who would then be looking for market rate housing. And so one of the things that's contained in the report that you circulated was the fairly significant number of jobs that have been lost in Brattleboro over the time period of the study, which tends to support the suggestion that the market rate housing sector is weak or weaker in Brattleboro, and the affordable housing sector is, relatively speaking, strong.
But isn't there a difference between single-family homes? Maybe there's not a difference between single-family homes that have been converted and are sort of hodgepodge together versus a regular apartment in a complex where they're just building units to suffice a need rather than just sort of out of desperation or
Yeah, but-
just to, you know what I mean?
But the housing stock,
Need batteries.
if half of all the housing units in Brattleboro were built before 1950,
Yeah.
then that's what you're going to get.
Right.
Yeah, I guess the question is.
Well, I mean,
there's
you,
something
you,
like-
you raise a good question in a slightly different way. So maybe what's present in other residential real estate markets not too far from here is what people refer to as scrape-offs. So if that 1920s house is in poor condition and has been broken up into 2 or even 3 apartments and is now no longer regarded as attractive and is not viable to renovate and keep as a 3-unit dwelling, but it's an otherwise attractive residential neighborhood close to amenities, somebody will buy it, knock it down, and build a single-family home. And there isn't anything like that. One of the things that's odder about Brattleboro than other communities is the almost total absence of demolition,
Yeah.
given the age and the condition of the stock. So in a different market setting, you might see more activity around that as people take advantage of the proximity, the location of the street address and want to live there, but not in that particular house. And so you got this really fairly unusual, I think, crossover between a lot of really old stock, not in particularly good condition, a large amount of it, a lot of it sort of renovated into multi-family unit dwellings, 3, even 4 apartments, and kind of just stuck.
But it's so Morningside in West Brattleboro, across from the diner.
Westgate.
Westgate.
Westgate. Sorry. So. And I'm
It's all right.
confused. So something like that. That's market rate.
No, Westgate's affordable.
Okay, so it seems like there isn't any market rate housing that conforms to that type of model.
The one a little bit further out, like just before you leave, kind of built up part in
Westbrook.
Westbrook, not to be confused with Westgate. It's also blue and white, nickel grey and white. That's, I think, market.
That's the one I'm talking about.
That's market rate. The very last one before the hill,
But those are apartments.
and they're apartments.
Yeah.
And then there's
Brookside Condos.
Sherwood Circle, though, is up behind Westgate, and that's market.
But
Right.
it hasn't been.
Yep.
That was
Right.
a Sir Sasimo development,
Right.
maybe the 3rd time around or something.
yeah, right. And Brookside dates from the 1970s, and as you can tell from looking at the architecture. And so,
And Arbor Hill was one, that was
Right.
built 15, 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
And,
right. So there's been relatively little expansion, and I think or relatively limited provision of any kind of new housing in any one of the sort of, I'm thinking about stock here, like not how affordable it is, but it doesn't matter which category or kind of housing that you're really thinking of. There has just not been very much new housing added to Brattleboro in the last 30 years. And it seems to me that even if you were going to try and utilize the contemporary methods for funding affordable housing, like mixed-use developments and
Incentives
public-private partnerships and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
it always assumes that there's a pretty vibrant, active private market for even that to be initiated. And I think one of the things that's a little daunting and difficult to understand about Brattleboro is that it's the private market that seems to be the most that's the one that's under.
Non-existent?
Yeah, that's the one. It's stagnant, and so the typical mechanisms that you would use in a much more vibrant community with growth and so forth would be that need to satisfy market rates would also be the thing that would be dragging along your provision of new affordable housing, and so you really end up falling back on the very effective work of organisations like Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, doing renovations, or the project like they're doing at the co-op.
Okay, so wait, I'm sorry, I'm still not totally understanding this. If right now, Westgate, what's the occupancy like in a place like that?
Oh, I'd say it's probably got it's
Probably
full.
close to full.
They have a waiting list.
I'd say
So-
less than what they call frictional. So
So
But
for
Westgate is Section 8 housing a lot. It's subsidized housing.
Westbrook is what you're talking about. Westbrook, the
What
one.
about Westbrook?
You're
Westbrook
talking
is-
about the apartments across
Yeah,
from
from
the
Chelsea.
okay. So that's probably
Full.
occupied
Yeah.
fully.
Is your question, are market rate apartments full and scarce?
Yeah, because there's a big difference, and I don't even know how you quantify this, but there is a big difference. If you're paying market rate for a place to live, you need a certain caliber. People expect a certain caliber of maybe a washer and dryer, maybe walking into a living room instead of a bedroom that you go through the kitchen, and just like a standard setup of houses. And Greenfield is they're seem to be expanding right now, and I'm looking at, I don't know about Keene necessarily, but when I look at Brattleboro, there's a lack of that type of housing,
Yes.
sort of like a stand. Okay,
And,
right?
and-
No.
and-
Yes,
and
I-
I believe we don't have that many areas zoned where someone could build more than two families. Am I correct with that?
No, we allow a lot of multi-unit.
I would say, if anything, the word that comes to mind is permissive, but
So there's a lot of areas where one could build
one and two
multi-unit?
families. So that we're clear, in the state, 1 and 2 family dwellings enjoy a slightly protected status under statute. So, in other words, any building site in Brattleboro, any residential building site in Brattleboro that's big enough for a single family dwelling is going to be permitted for a 2-family dwelling. So, so first of all, you should think that a duplex is the minimum practical size. We really couldn't do much to prevent somebody building a duplex instead of just a single family home. And then large parts of, I don't think we really, it would be a commercial housing, so 4 units and above. We have some extra guidance on that, but it's
Well-
we're pretty open about where that could be located.
Yeah, I would say though that we pretty much allow it everywhere water and sewer is
Is.
located. I think with the exception of the Putney Road area, which obviously we've identified as a flat buildable, desirable place to locate. So I think we're definitely going to
And
talk
we
about
did-
looking at that. I would say maybe some of the other areas, you're not necessarily going to, there's not maybe a lot of vacant land, so you'd be doing the scrape off
Right.
type scenario. So I think that it is possible there's not enough,
But,
if you look at it that way, but
right. But
where do you want it? If we want it within the infrastructure, then
yeah.
Didn't we
I
talk
think
about
that,
expanding it to Putney Road when we were talking
Yeah,
about
that's
Putney Road?
Right.
that's in here
Yeah.
too, especially called out. So
I would say anywhere there's water and sewer, the size of the site is the only limitation. effectively.
And another thing that we discussed once upon a time that might assist with this that we don't have in here was encouragement of infill, what do you call it?
Yeah.
Infill building, or what's the right term?
Yep.
Yeah.
Building infill. And I know we talked about putting that in zoning tools, and it got put off to discussing at a later time, which I'm assuming is this is.
Is this the later time?
And I think that, you know, that's the word that probably came up the most in the whole discussion about Putney Road. And so, you know, you could consider any development that happens out there to be infill, in a sense, you know. I think, I mean, is that technically right?
There's lots of different types of
Yeah.
infill. You know, I don't think that we have too many barriers to somebody wanting to put another unit on their lot. Right now, if they can meet setbacks, the state is pretty,
Relaxed about it.
yeah, I mean, they have some statutes protecting accessory dwelling units, and so that makes it fairly simple to build a separate unit on your property.
And are there rules about parking in this town in terms of things like that? Do you need a certain amount of parking spaces?
There is an explicit rule for the urban centre that off-street parking cannot be a requirement. So, I mean, I know that's structured oddly as a sentence, but basically,
People need a place to put their car.
it's not a criteria for review in the urban centre. And then outside of the urban centre, only in the instance where you're talking about 4 units or more on a parcel would parking become a question.
You're saying that in the urban center, you don't have to require parking,
You don't have to require off-street parking.
off-street parking, right? And that takes into consideration that the parking facilities that are available are available. And that's what we want
it's
to
a little
make
bit
use
more.
of.
There's a little bit more controversy around it than that, but yeah, basically
Right.
the argument is
We don't want to talk about that.
no, we
do
don't.
Yeah.
But there's adequate access to off-street parking provided by the municipality, and that it's free. The issue here is overnight parking in winter, so
Uh-huh.
so that you can snowplow. That's the. I mean, I think that's the single biggest
Yeah.
issue to address,
Yeah.
and it has been addressed.
So if you've got water and sewer access, you can build a 10-unit building on your lot if you want to.
Well, you get a certain number of units
Yeah.
per square footage.
Yeah, it's
Your lot square footage.
it's expressed as a ratio between the lot size area and the building area.
Jimmy's thinking about,
Yeah.
No,
Your idea
no.
about
Actually, I looked into this when I
demolishing
first.
houses and
I
building
looked
new
into
ones.
building when I first moved here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to build a multifamily, and I could not find a spot that was properly zoned to build a six or 8 unit house that I could build.
Maybe you should sit down and talk to the planner.
I think I will.
Yeah.
yeah, I know some
Pretty
people
fun.
wanted to do
Because-
kind of like co-housing kind of in town. And,
Well, that's a little different, but yeah.
but that would be multiple units,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a multi-unit building on a site.
Well, it could be a multi-unit building or just multiple buildings. I mean, there's all sorts of different models for co-housing as well. Typically, in each one of these examples, what's interesting here is that there are markets, in play, and there are, people have to figure out what their return on their investment is going to be. And what I'd say is, even going back to Timberley's question about Keene versus Greenfield versus Brattleboro, what is striking about Brattleboro is the extent to which its housing market appears to be different from at least Keene, which is a much bigger community, but and to some extent Greenfield. And
Keene has college there, and a
Right,
lot of
it's-
those people rent in that town.
Sure, but
We have colleges here.
yeah, right. I mean, it's just a different context. I mean, there's what you could refer to nicely as condo farms are far more frequent in Keene than they are here. And for the most part, they're market rate, or there's many that are market rate. Whereas here, similar settings are more like Westgate or some other combination. I mean, I'd say Brookside, Morningside, down off 142, and Westbrook are the only market rate
Harbor Hill.
Arbor Hill.
Arbor Hill are the only market rate kind of, for want of a better term, compact living, relatively contemporary housing complexes that we have, which as a percentage of the total amount of stock is not great. So, but we're thinking of a very particular sort of household's requirements or preferences, that they want something that's fairly easy to maintain, that's affordable, that doesn't have a yard, and so on and so forth. I think for us it is a kind of a chicken and the egg problem. We're not entirely sure which came first, the lack of viable market rate housing or the disappearance of jobs and therefore the disappearance of people who could participate in market rate housing.
One of the things that comes up fairly often, I think even in our discussions here, is if there was senior housing created, then many of the people that are holding on to their houses in a sense, or they don't have another place to move to around here, could move, and that would open up houses that are existing. And in fact, one of the people that used to be on the planning commission, Hugh Bronson, he used to bring that up over and over because there really wasn't like a place where he and his wife could move. And they, live in a ranch house up on South Street, and that's a really good example, I think, of that kind of lack of mobility.
Where I live is enormously like that.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and they're beautiful houses, but you would think that I think that's another reason why you want to kind of focus development on the eastern end of town, because those people will ultimately need to be replaced in those housing structures.
Right.
And there needs to be like a demand.
Right.
There's a general lack of condos in this town, and not that I'm necessarily a huge proponent of condos in the sense of suburban kind of Connecticut areas or Boston areas like that, but there is definitely a lack, and when Arbor Hill was built, it all got snatched up
Pretty quickly.
and
Well, it took a little while.
those are the
though.
things that I think of as the aging boomers kind of, that's a need, I think, that we have for our town.
Yeah,
Who don't
I mean-
want to move into a house, but who want to move into something like Morningside, only it's full up,
Right.
Where are all those people going to go?
I mean, I guess it's not anything that we can resolve tonight, but I mean, I guess the challenge for us in trying to figure this stuff out is to sort of look at how functional a market is. And so all this pent-up demand that everyone's expressing, your neighborhood, other people's of wanting to be able to sell, for want of a better term, a traditional family home, a freestanding dwelling on a quarter acre or a little bit more, and then move to a more compact design home, more like in the Morningside kind of context. If there was real strong demand for that, and there was a return on it, in other words, people were willing to pay what it cost to build that, then you would reasonably expect it to have happened by now. But one of the things that is a bit baffling is that even though we can figure out that there is that demand, there's certainly, financially, it certainly doesn't appear to work, because you'd have to, I mean, it is an assumption, but you would expect developers or contractors to figure that out and respond to it in some way, and they're just not.
You think it has something to do with Act 250? I mean, the permitting
Yeah.
process?
I think it has to do with the recession.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
the
right
past
now,
4 years,
right now,
no
it's
one's
just
gonna build anything.
credit's too frozen. Nobody can build anything.
Yeah.
And the boomers are just coming in, so that's going to
Yeah, I think all the things you just said are true, except it's been true for Brattleboro right at the top of the boom. When there was money flowing, arguably freely, it's still there was no local sort of real spur or pickup in, and no one was trying anything new or risky. So no one was buying two old homes on a street, close to downtown, and knocking down the two old homes and replacing it with
good thing.
3 townhouses. I mean, but
somebody on Western Avenue, for instance, bought Jack Burgess's house and turned it from a house into 3 or 4 units, you know.
Right, the barn.
And they sold, no,
Uh,
Two doors down from Holton Home. Is that what
Yeah.
you're talking about?
yeah.
yeah, okay.
And, I mean, that was something, and I can think of, 5 to 10 years ago, several big houses that people came from elsewhere,
Right.
pretty well-to-do people, and bought them and made them into their dream houses, you
Yes.
know? And, I mean, not that that's, I'm thinking that at a couple of levels down, let's say, as a possibility, I mean, people, I dealt with people from Long Island who have moved here because their house on Long Island sold for $600,000.
Right.
They have money and they need to do something, and so they buy a house here,
Right.
fix it up, and I that's the kind of thing that I could see happening. Now, well, I'm not saying that's like this wave of people,
Right.
but I can think of probably half a dozen people in the last 4 or 5 years that have done that.
And I think that's the observation that's made in the report that was done for Windsor Housing Trust, that there seems to be, and the people that are migrating into town are purchasing homes and doing work on them or whatever, and that market is significantly at a significantly higher price point than most people with jobs locally could afford. So I guess that's the way of trying to bear out what
I'm probably
you're
thinking of more of people that are ready to retire,
Mhm.
that may want to retire here.
Yep.
They don't have a huge amount of money, but they have
Some.
They live in a certain maybe live a middle class life somewhere.
Right.
Where the housing values are higher than they are here.
Yes.
And they want to come here and spend some of their equity or some of the proceeds of their sale someplace else and retire here. I mean, I've run into quite a few people that have come here to retire, and we don't have, and these are not people that are rich people or anything. I mean,
No.
people that would like to come here because of the quality of life. Again, I'm not saying this is like this wave that's cresting or anything like that, but there are people that are doing that, and some of them are moving to towns outside of Brattleboro.
Yes.
That wouldn't be their reflex thing to do, I don't think, based on where they come from. Living in Brattleboro would be a nice thing, I think, but not having, we just worked on a house in Dummerston, where I think they would have probably gotten a house in Brattleboro if there had been one available.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So,
There's not a good stock of available houses. If you're going looking for houses to buy in this town, even though there may be a large number of houses on the market, depending on what you're looking for, there's not a lot of choice.
It's
And-
basically all old.
So that,
It's all old.
yeah.
right. That's
If
what
you're not the kind of person that's willing to buy something and fix it up,
Right.
there's nothing to buy.
Well, I think that's I think that's one of the bigger takeaway lessons here. And so, one of the problems though is, and so I'm kind of intrigued as to how this really works, because if that's what you're looking for, even if you have a job in Brattleboro, you're going to find something more akin to what you're looking for, probably in Keene or even in Chesterfield. And so, when we think about the housing market here, it needs to incorporate or include those kinds of outlying communities. And
I think all those things that you're talking about the trends, are true. But on the other hand, we need to look at what's the vision we want to create and put some things in here under what the needs are that might be a little outside the box of what's been happening for the last 10 years, but we don't know what it's going to be in 5 years. We really don't know, and there's going to be some turnaround and some changes happening, and those might be some exciting, interesting things. So I think we could get really bogged down in this stuck, stagnant place where you're saying the housing market is, but that's not going to help our town plan. And I would really like to see us in the, I mean, we can't create somebody to go out and build houses, of course, that's not our job, but to just have some goals in there that are really encouraging some new kinds of things. And it might just be, we'd like to see the development of housing again to accommodate market rate housing for developing boomers, maybe more, whatever that looks like, smaller bungalows in a little cottage community, or condos, or whatever. And it's not about whether it's right or wrong, it's about where we're going and the vision that we might not quite have yet, but we have to allow space for that to happen, instead of getting bogged down into all the what we don't have and what hasn't been happening. And yes, market trends do tend to show this, and this, but what happens if somebody comes and all of a sudden decides to build a half a dozen little cottages that are 1,000 square feet or less, and it gets some good press and publicity, and all of a sudden all these people come and they're bought up within 6 months. Who's to say that that couldn't happen? You know, all of our trends aren't showing that, but,
Well,
you know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's like
Well,
people want to move into green living houses, so to speak, and there was just a little development of duplexes in Greenfield. It was a pilot project, but it sold all out, and because people wanted those kind of, you know, a little family neighborhood, a cul-de-sac of 10 houses that were duplexes that had all green stuff and were very economical, and they were both market rate and affordable. There was both in there, and
well,
I think we should be encouraging this.
I think the section on zoning tools gets a little bit into that, and I think that I would like to look there, because that's something that we can do and that we can, you know, that can happen through planning.
Yeah.
I would suggest if we talked a little bit more in the current conditions section about the population,
Yeah.
the statistics,
Yep.
I think that would help the reader kind of understand where the town is and how the housing fits into what the population it's serving is. And then if we added a section that kind of tied in economic development
Yep.
to what Rod was saying earlier, whether it's the chicken or the egg, and so you have economic development and trying to get more young adults in, as we've said over and over, into town, and where would those people live? That would lead to this goal that we're talking about having new development.
Yeah.
Is there any what determines when a developer goes in and says, all right, I'm going to build houses, mixed use building, retail on the first floor, housing on the top 3 floors? What makes that person decide what kind of housing, as far as I'm going to do all affordable housing because I get a 10% tax? I mean, pretty soon that market is going to be kind of saturated. Or maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't know what those statistics are right now. But to encourage different types of uses even within a building, so that it's not. Is there a number that says only a percentage of the housing can be affordable? Or
No, there's no limit.
No.
There's no limit to the balance between affordable and market rate in an individual building or something similar. I know that the puzzle of trying to figure out designated affordable versus market rate for the redevelopment of Brooks House is one of the kind of, if you like, the marketing challenges for that project. So in other words, there's kind of a magic point where too much affordable housing tends to have a negative impact on your ability to ask the right price for the market's rate housing, and to some extent, the more market rate housing you have in a complex like that, the more difficult it becomes to, from a project standpoint, economically, to have affordable housing. So there's these sort of trade-offs that you have to get into. That's probably the biggest one I can think of right now in town. And to get back to the other point, I think what we've got is a very well organised affordable housing sector. So we've got well-maintained waiting lists and we've got lots of express demand, and that's what you get when you go look for the data. We don't have any similar mechanism for capturing interest in market rate housing of any kind. It's not like the person that Gary was talking to that ended up in Dummerston but maybe started looking in Brattleboro, left their name on a waiting list for a house to come up. But, you know, they're just like, I'm going to buy something this weekend and, you know, I'm ready to go and show me 6 houses. Oh, so the one I really like is in Dummerston. I guess that's it. You know, and it's a conversation for them between the bank and each other and whatever, and the realtor to make that decision. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is we don't know too much about actually what the market is in Brattleboro because there's not enough activity to really quantify it or, you know, to get a really good feel for it.
But we do know that there's a lack of market rate housing in Brattleboro, specifically downtown. I mean, if we're looking at where the affordable housing is placed right now, what percentage of that is downtown on one street?
Oh, well, given West Brattleboro, actually,
West Brattleboro?
I don't know if the concentration downtown would stand out necessarily, actually, because West Brattleboro has a very significant affordable housing community.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest concentration of affordable housing
Yeah.
in southern Vermont, for sure, you know.
If you take into account the mobile home park and Melrose,
When you talk
West
about
State.
market rate, are we talking about market rate rentals or market rate that people come by off the street, like single family and duplex houses?
I'm struggling to find out what it is that you want.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, what I want to, I want there to be a balance, not just in these nodes, but in the buildings as well. If you put all old people in one, so I didn't mean to say old people.
That's okay.
But if everyone is 70,
Pick one of us.
Youth.
and say,
Careful, honey.
She went like that. She went like that. She was old people.
everyone is over 40.
Told you, dude.
I'm not in my 30s yet. I feel like there needs to be a better balance, and that's not just from the social component in these buildings, but where people, how people are using the town, how people are spending their money.
So what you're talking about is zoning then, right? You want
I
zoning
don't
to
know if
encourage-
zoning control it. What controls this? Is there any control?
We can't really do too much around
well, it's
age
kind of
segmentation.
America, you know.
You know, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, and I understand and I hear what you're saying. I don't know that you can impose anything or even create incentives to ensure that, say, the new Brooks House, hypothetically, if you looked at it as a kind of a little ant farm, that it would all work out nicely demographically. There would be this certain percentage of low-income people, there'd be this certain percentage of youngish people, and it wouldn't exactly be all low-income people, and there'd be a certain percentage of people who were
Over 40.
really old. And certain percent, you know, like, I don't think you can ever sort of figure out how to sort of place each household in such a way to get this optimum
That's social
outcome.
engineering.
But it's
It
working in other
sounds
places.
good, but it sounds foreign.
But it's working in other places. I mean,
Well, you know what?
Is it
I
possible
think
they're
what
not
you
zoning
want.
for it and it's happening naturally?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what you want is what's proposed in our next discussion. Because
Actually, there's something to that.
Yes.
you know, there's the type of housing and the type of mixed use
Yes.
and new second floor residential. That's what you want.
well, you know what else I want?
Good, good.
Well, it is
While we're
Christmas,
talking
so
about what I
we're taking
want.
lists.
That's right.
So, what I was thinking is that, you know, with a lot of these buildings downtown, how we used to build buildings makes it too inefficient to tear them down and then to rebuild in many cases in downtown buildings. It's a daunting process. And the way that we're constructing buildings now, in the future, will lend itself to having other uses. So if we're, I don't know how you do this, but if we're building buildings and renovating them in the future and putting some kind of parameters on it that you can, whether it's firewalls, the sprinklers, elevators, all of these components lend our buildings to being more adaptive in the future, so that we can suffice whatever that need may be that we can't even envision right now. Maybe it's studios, maybe it's a college, maybe it's giant tech companies moving into town because you can work from anywhere. I don't think that's far-fetched, but in 15 years from now, we have no idea what's going to happen, and to be able to put, even to state, designing buildings with the thought that other uses, that these buildings could suffice other needs in the future. I'm not sure how you say that.
Well,
Flexible.
Some folks put out a proposal for a building on Putney Road, and it's mixed use. And they got preliminary approval.
Yeah, you mean the Howard Printing?
Yeah. And so, that was going to be a mixture of commercial, retail, and on the bottom floor of a light industrial plant for printing, and then I think eight apartments upstairs.
Something like that.
And it's a beautiful plan. What they're concerned about is the demand.
What they're concerned about is what? I couldn't hear
Demand.
you. Demand.
And but to build that building, let's say, and build in some flexibility is really hard. Elevators are for instance,
Yeah,
are
I
probably
realize
the
that.
single
Well, the
biggest
co-op is-
cost of that
But
building.
I also think that falls into how the zoning works too, because when you're moving to a new town, you're like, ooh, I like this town. I'm going to go find an apartment. And when you drive up and you see, you're like, oh, where do I park at? It doesn't feel like it's good. That building is a good example. I'm glad that they're doing it. I was actually on the DRB when it was going through, and what they're doing, it makes sense, but it's not like you're living there because you're sufficing a need, not because it's walkable to downtown or because it has this cute little park green space next to it. You're living there to suffice a need, and that's where I feel like it's really important, especially when we're doing infill projects, to make sure that these developments are, without limiting the developer too much, putting plans in place that allow for, when things do change, you have a front door where it makes sense, so people aren't like, what's going on?
Right.
We got
It's
into that when we were doing
placemaking.
rural commercial.
Right.
It's like the quality of it. Just because you can put an apartment on the second floor doesn't make it a quality place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was actually a really big challenge in rural commercial. So I think the town zoning ordinance already is pretty open to the notion of mixed use, but in the absence of clear design standards or really explicit landscaping and siting criteria, what you can often and I actually am thinking here of examples of outside of Brattleboro where you have sure, this is mixed use, this retail and office space on the first floor and whatever, and what you have is really bad conflicts with the parking requirements of the residents versus the customers and workers in the stores or offices. Dumpsters for trash parked conveniently for the guy in the dumpster truck rather than with any thought to the person's bedroom that's above it. Children's plastic toys strewn all over the yard because there's nowhere else to put them. All sorts of challenging conflicts in terms of what you might want to say is lowest common denominator housing combined with a commercial market that works on some level. I think one of the challenges that I think is apparent in Brattleboro is that there's actually a lot of vacancy in the commercial market. So the kinds of things that would lead to thoughtful, maybe slightly more expensive, at least in the planning phase. So in other words, a commercial property owner utilizing the services of an architect and other professionals, such as a landscape architect, to come up with a really pleasant mixed use. What you often see is less than optimal outcomes. And when there's so much commercial space vacant, it's hard to imagine that there's pressure on commercial property holders to distinguish their property from somebody else's by appealing to a higher set of standards or expectations. And so what you get is that kind of bad mix. But what I want to sort of try and take away from this to some extent is I sort of like the idea of thinking about the vision that people would want. And to go back to Jim's question about infill, in my experience, infill housing includes developers potentially coming along and saying, right, I actually am going to buy the 4 houses, at the end of this street or on this corner, and I'm going to wipe them, and then I'm going to do, 6 cottages, or I'm going to redevelop this housing into a more appropriate, marketable product that I think I can get a return on. And so where you see it happening, embedded in that is a whole set of decisions by financial backers as much as anything else, saying, yeah, the cost of knocking these things down is X, but you're going to more than recoup your expenses when you rebuild. And I think that, again, Brattleboro isn't in that situation yet, for a whole host of complicated reasons. So I think it would be good for us to think about how to actually bring about infill housing and be open about saying that one of our concerns is that a very large percentage of Brattleboro stock is older and not great condition, and that's something that we would encourage changing. I don't know. I mean, if you want to say something like that, I think that's worthwhile putting in. It might freak out the old home, this old house set, which is pretty big here. I think Jim's arm's about to fall off because he's very elderly.
I think that actually I liked Carolina's idea about, like you said, trying to set some vision. And I wonder if we shouldn't do this section and then come back to some things that we could do for zoning. Because I have a feeling actually what's going to come out of this discussion that we have scheduled next actually would influence what we want to put in to potential zoning things. And just to, separate thing, this was a great article. I know this ended up as an article in the Commons, and the one thing that isn't mentioned in here, and I don't think
what is this?
This
Byron
is the
Stuckey?
email that
Byron?
by
Robert Ozen?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
The one thing
There was
that's
a big
not
article
mentioned in
the
here
Commons,
actually is the cost of heating oil. We have a huge percentage of our housing is heated by oil
Oil.
around here.
That's right.
And I don't know if there's much that we can do about it, if there's anything we can say in the plan. It's certainly worth recognizing, though, that a huge chunk of the housing cost, more and more, is going towards heating it.
Right.
So even as prices are going up, that's not landing in the pockets, or it's
No,
landing in
but-
the pockets of Fleming and Sandry and those. Well, and of course they have to buy from somebody else. So.
Well, when
Not
you
landing in
say
our
that
pockets,
there's
it's not.
mostly older housing stock, then that's
Yeah.
fits right into what you're saying, because
So it's
most of
a-
those houses were built
I don't know if there's anything
to
we
be
can do
energy
about it.
efficient in any way.
Right, and now PACE. So PACE exists now around here, because PACE is actually one program that will allow us to actually do something about that problem.
That's
PACE
over
is
occupied.
allowed in the state.
PACE is
it's
allowed
been-
in the state.
Yeah, and so we're in the process.
Okay,
We're
so it's
somewhere
coming.
in the process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's actually one of the few things that can solve that problem in the older home
Right.
space. It's really one of
Yeah.
the only things.
It's probably, I think, it's the most exciting thing that's
Yeah,
going
I
on.
agree.
So,
So for people like me and our viewers who don't know what you're talking about, What's pace?
It's,
Well, it's the older people have to pace themselves.
Yeah, you're not expected to
it's
know.
in the energy chapter, but it's about financing energy improvements over a long enough period of time so that the savings from the energy improvements are greater than the payments that you have to make, and it would be done through the municipality and paid for when you pay your property taxes, essentially. And it's a bonding, and and we're sort of in the, what would you say, the crawl before you walk point with pace.
Yeah, I think we're building up.
We're in the process, I think.
I think we're building up momentum to do it. And there was a bit of back and forth with the last select board, and the current select board is a little bit more open to it. The earlier efforts, I mean, we can talk about it later, James, but I mean, there are earlier efforts. There was some uncertainty around Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's attitude to not being, I can't remember the technical term now, but
The first name.
Yeah, Fannie and
first.
Freddie would get
Yeah.
subordinated.
yeah, that's right. They didn't want to be subordinated by the municipality at the point where the house was sold and the mortgage was cleared. And there was a way in which the original PACE legislation was written that would make the municipality be the one that was paid prior to Fannie and Freddie. So that's been fixed to their
Did
satisfaction.
Newt Gingrich come up with that?
I do believe that one of the deeper
He was the enabler.
contributions from Newt was that, I'm sure, along with mentions of permanency and
So it's a big deal in California, for instance. There's zillions of dollars worth of that kind of stuff that's happened already, and then it kind of came to a halt with
Kind of
the
a bump.
Fannie and Freddie stuff, and then now it's come out
Putney's further
Come
along,
out.
aren't they?
in general, most things.
a little bit, yeah, maybe a little bit. But I mean, people are definitely active in getting it going, so.
They've been pacing themselves.
Yeah. So I think as
Yep.
has been suggested, I think it's a good idea if we move along to the active living workshops part of this. Active living, that's short for,
I found a gray hair the other day, FYI.
Found a
Happy?
gray?
You happy?
I found not a gray hair the other day.
It didn't belong to me, but I found it kicking around the house.
Yeah.
It's very traumatizing.
Yeah, really.
And it's different texture.
Not yet. Okay.
So
Really?
Tell me about it.
Look,
Our
it's just
official,
hair all over,
our official duty with this report is to accept it and change it and
Well, I mean,
The changing part.
discuss it. Well, but it's to
Yep, it's
to
to-
discuss it and say, okay, great.
yeah, I mean, I just gave you select portions of it. Hopefully you got the longer forwarded
Big juicy.
document, but it was awfully big. So we have a couple of days to get comments in, and then they'll finalize it, and then we can more formally present it. But I think all the planning commissioners pretty much attended one of the sessions, so good representation. You'd be interested in seeing it, and I think it plays really well into the town plan and transportation, land use, and apparently housing.
Yeah, all of a sudden, housing.
Municipal services, all of that, so I thought it would be good to get your reaction to it.
So who has comments?
This primarily focuses on the 100-day plan, right? But is the hope that the 100-day plan is
Yeah.
going to do some
Yeah.
things that we're going to like, and that's going to give us momentum to get to another step of even more improvements? Is that the idea?
I think the focus of the 100-day plan is, in fact, the crosswalk at the hospital. So if you turn to page
20.
20. That gray shaded box, which is probably not gray in color.
Oh. That's an interesting thought.
So that's an island that would be where the present crosswalk is. but
Yeah.
would act as a refuge for
Well, that's,
crossing.
that's
Yeah.
not
But
necessarily.
then the list of things on 18 is the
Yes.
broader list.
Right. So, well, that's really weird.
Yeah, your copy's
My copy's all messed up. 20 comes after 18, 21.
Some of you may.
All right. Okay. So, looking at page 20, the top 4 priorities were construct a crosswalk island on Canal Street in front of the hospital, foster relationships with the property owners to advocate and educate. 3, continue to improve the Canal Street gateway, and 4, add bike lanes to Canal Street. And that that last one would further reduce the travel lane width at that point, and so there's a sort of a mooted, it's a traffic calming strategy in itself by reducing the width of the lane and then encouraging bike lanes at that point, sort of changing that balance between vehicular traffic and pedestrian and bike traffic. But the key thing there is to try in 100 days to get the
Get a better
crosswalk,
crosswalk.
crosswalk on an island constructed.
And, the person that I see there most at that crosswalk is the crossing guard.
Yes.
I wonder, has anybody talked to the crossing guard? I'm just curious.
No.
And I thought the crossing guard was up the next one.
The
Hadn't
crossing
seen
guard
the
is
crossing
a-
guard at
The crossing guard actually, he is.
Oh,
He's up at Oak
oh, up
Street.
at Lexington, is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
He's located
okay.
on,
Okay, so I'm wrong about
Lexington
that,
and
yeah.
Oak. Or,
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there's a little parking lot for one of the doctor's offices.
Yeah.
That's where he stands.
Oh, okay, right.
So it's more,
Oh, that crossing guard. I see him everywhere, I guess. so.
right.
So that intersection was chosen because that's,
It was a ranking of the participants.
uh-huh.
So we talked about lots of different things that could be improved in the corridor, and then the participants who were there ranked them, and that had the most.
I think also it had to do, it had the least number of real estate owners that would affect it. I mean, there was basically just a hospital and somebody else that had to be talked to and convinced to do something, right?
I don't remember.
I don't remember that part
I mean,
coming up.
it's pretty much
Is that
right
Oak
away.
Street, or Oak Grove, I mean, right there?
Yeah,
Oak Grove.
It's Pine,
but it's
Belmont and Pine.
It's Belmont and Pine and Lexington and Oak Grove,
Is the next one up.
right?
Yeah.
You mean Clark and Oak Grove?
No.
No?
Oh, no, he might be right.
Yeah, Pine is down at the bottom of the hill, bottom of
I
Hospital.
wish we
Hill.
knew where we were.
Great.
It's the, are you talking about it's the intersection where Belmont comes out?
Yes, there.
And isn't Oak Grove right across the street? Or
I thought Oak Grove was right across.
Yeah, Oak Grove on one side and Clark on the other side,
Yeah.
just across the street.
Okay, yeah, I get you now. I'm sorry.
So that's where Dr. Daly's office is, isn't it, across the street? and-
Right, so the Brattleboro dental, the tan flat roofed building is
Yeah,
on
surgery,
one corner.
dental surgery or.
Right.
whatever, Yeah,
And that's Oak Grove, right?
yeah.
All
And
right.
so, I don't know the answer, so that's why I'm asking is it because the number of people that would be close to that intersection from their walking the feeder streets?
I think it has to do with the speed coming up the hill. The hospital's there. There's a lot of, you've got the school down the other end.
Uh-huh.
You've got the nursing home, Pine Heights, there on the corner there. People just really felt unsafe crossing there. It's wide.
Uh-huh.
It's,
It's the width.
it's
All right.
the width, the speed. visibility.
And it's a hard intersection anyway just for turning in and out and, I mean, there's a lot about it that's difficult. So the intersection, the crosswalk is on the uphill side of that intersection, right?
Yes.
Yes, it would be on the southern corner of Belmont and Canal. In other words, closer to Price Chopper.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
I'm
So-
not
so
trying,
that was
I'm
one-
not nitpicking
No,
this.
no, it's good.
I'm just curious about the specifics,
mhm.
Is that sort of what we're doing, though, is sort of ratifying this or questioning it, or we're just
I think just
saying?
exploring it. I mean,
One of the things that stood out to Rod and I when we read this report was, as you know, we've talked about traffic safety, we've talked about the different roles that people have regarding roads, and Planning Commission is not involved. And so perhaps like when we think about this report in context to the town plan, well, what kind of role should the Planning Commission be playing? Because are we going to get to complete streets without that voice
Right.
as
Right.
part of the, it's going to take a while to change, and the Planning Commission can be big advocates for it. We've talked a lot about it. So do we need to make a recommendation in the plan to,
Yeah.
I
to
would
the role?
think that would be all that we could do.
right, and so there might be like a two. If we need to get on this within 100 days, so there's sort of a separate track here about really getting going on this, and then longer term is the plan itself. And I think to some extent our experience with this project and then reading the report has made us think that we probably would benefit from formalizing in the text of the town plan the Planning Commission's desire to be more integral to the decision-making process around road design, roads, and bike and pedestrian facilities.
Accommodations.
And right now, and we've talked about this to some extent already, Gary. Right now it's splintered or it's not, doesn't really touch on the Planning Commission. And I think that the Complete Streets legislation itself just assumes that the towns are going to respond this way. But I think I think the obligation is on the Planning Commission to kind of make your position clear to the select board through the town plan.
I think this report and the Hawk report,
Yes.
and there's a lot of things
Kind of stacking up.
that are kind of steps to this ultimate conclusion that we're
Right.
going to make.
Right, including every time we've done public outreach, the thing that hits number one is exactly the same issue, which is bike ped accommodations need to be dramatically improved.
When we're almost done with the plan, I bet you there's like, a handful of things that we all feel really strongly about that we should kind of put up front and tell the select board, these are our big ticket items.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this, in terms of, if we want to encourage complete streets, that's what it's called?
Yep.
Would this be in, what section of would this cross over several sections of the town plan that we would want to state this? Or is it in transportation? Where would we put it?
I think it would, we haven't resolved it, and
It's mostly in transportation right now,
Yeah.
but I think the
Okay.
concepts of mixed use and creating livable, walkable
Mm-hmm.
communities or neighborhoods
Community, yeah,
shows up
community
in land
development.
use.
yes. And
So,
then to some
I-
extent, municipal services, if there's a question about the capital plan and
Okay.
the allocation of resources within the within a municipality.
So I would propose that we put in the town plan, wherever reasonably appropriate, that we encourage the concepts of complete streets.
Right.
So if that's in the transportation section, if it's in the community development section, help me out here, people. Any other sections we can think of?
Housing.
Energy.
Right,
Energy,
energy.
yeah.
Energy,
Maybe it's
yeah.
a,
Yeah, walking.
Oh,
And,
walkability, right, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's my proposal for
Okay.
the minutes.
And so what we've been kind of, in kicking around the whole thing about the capital plan and the town plan is, we talked about it last time with municipal facilities and services, is just as Sue said, what part is the planning commission in the future going to take, and what kind of participation will there be in the, for instance, the capital plan? If the sidewalk prioritizing, happens without any attention paid to what is in the town plan as far as transportation goes and all the chapters, like you just said, Jim, then we'll be missing a pretty big input. So I think we'll want to state that, I think, as tactfully as we can, because, everything like that treads on somebody's toes, and, pedestrian, that's not a good thing, to have something treading on your toes, but those things that happen, I don't mean to say they happen badly now, but they happen sort of in an isolated way in the Public Works Department. And that's probably not even a good word to use, but I don't know who makes those decisions now and how it happens, but they probably don't consult the public or the town plan, And since that's been our number one public input, as you said, Rod, I think we really need to. I think it's a front and center thing.
Right. I think it gets back a little bit to the issue that we have more broadly across the community, which links back to the conversation that we're having earlier tonight. When you're in a holding pattern kind of position, which the municipality has been for a really long time. So in other words, we're not extending or expanding in any particular direction. So you can't point to that new area of town that we've been devoting all our energy to and neglecting the old area of town. We've just been trying to hang on to what we've got. And so part of the challenge there is you're reordering or you're re-ranking priorities that are already pretty tight. And it's sort of what gets done now is what absolutely has to get done now for some, really severe reason. And in a non-expansionary kind of atmosphere, it's hard to transfer your energy and say, okay, let's make priorities or let's rank things a little bit differently, assuming that we've got extra resources. But I think it's important the town plan be the guide.
But for example, the Union Station project is happening.
Sure.
And so,
Yep.
And that's something that, we've talked about and what should be in that and everything, which not that we've had a lot of input to it lately, but, it's
Right.
it's happening.
Right.
And I think that's the point, is that things are going to happen,
Right.
and they can happen one way or they can happen another way, and it would be good to have them happen in such a way that people in the community feel like they're getting something, out of this from a quality of life point of view.
Right, and I think from the planning commission standpoint, I think it's really good that the plan be a list of current projects, such as Union Station, proposed projects, whatever we've got in mind, and priorities and goals to even shape new projects that we should be pursuing that reflect the wider community's set of expectations and goals. So even if you go on, I think we've done a pretty good job of doing that. But when it comes to that final draft of the town plan, that's another thing that I think we should be sort of really be able to point to explicitly and say to the select board, these, as Liz said, these are sort of the big ticket items. So that would be completion of Union Station, or the continuation of the redevelopment of that neighborhood. And to go back to the reason why we switched gears here, I think in some ways what we're talking about when we're talking about the zoning changes, the deeper changes behind Canal Street, if you like, that's also what we're looking at here. We're looking at trying to mobilize interest in not just fixing the crosswalk outside the hospital, but really beginning to transform this neighborhood and encourage new interest in it on all sorts of different levels.
Yep.
I think I'd have to look at the rest of the report to find more of that, more of the zoning and mixed-use elements
Right.
that the consultant talked about that day. It's not in the summary pages here that much, but
Right.
I know there was a lot that day that we...
Right.
The things about where trees go between streets and buildings and parking lots and stuff like that, is that all stuff? And I guess we would have to review what they are. Is that stuff that we could then put in zoning, that we want to add to zoning in the future?
Well, that wasn't what I was
The parking
thinking
lots have to
of.
be behind, or
Oh.
whatever the
well,
things are.
that-
The parking
Some of
lot's
it.
behind, yeah, the street trees is more of that street issue that we talked about. But
Right.
then he talked about how, for example, instead of the Walgreens that's there, or the one across the street where there's an insurance office,
Yes.
have a matching commercial store with levels of residential above it. And he had an example
Yeah.
of a CVS with multi-story. So that's kind of a, what's that alternative zoning that I just can't-
Form-based.
Form-based code.
Form-based, like a form-based code type of building where, actually, what the new co-op looks like now,
Right.
and all those changes that they made, move the parking to the back, have it face the street, have several levels and mixed use, I think.
So these are things we could do with zoning rules, that when the town plan is done, so we can put in the town plan that we want to look at complete streets, then we can follow up with zoning rules
Yeah.
later.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I
With these
think
kinds
that-
of specifics, we can put in the zoning rules?
Yeah, and then, of course, we can address Timberley's wants and needs, which is why we're all
Yes,
here.
it would be a separate section of the zoning law, probably in a table.
Well, is there a way that we can encourage that through when we go to rewrite the zoning at some point?
To encourage.
Well, that's a question I had, because remember, on this, and I forget the name of the woman who was the assistant, the planner, but anyway, she had specific ideas for how to create a form-based code like in the zoning without trouble
Right.
of having a form-based code.
So,
And I think that's what we want.
yeah, and for things like street trees and, at what point does the town, if ever, do they pay for improvements on something like a sidewalk? Let's say that on Canal Street, somebody wanted to do a mixed-use building, Canal and Price Chopper. Let's say they wanted to do a mixed-use, so we're getting that little town center field. How much money does the developer, you don't have to answer this, how much money does the developer want to put in for something like that for when they don't see the real value in it? And maybe if they have enough vision, they do, but typically it's all about the buck. So if you can encourage them through a higher FAR or something.
Well, I think what he talked about that day, and I think in the evening too, was that he was advocating, and so was Hawk and our planners, having another strip of commercial development, an infill block in front of the Price Chopper at the street there, and across the pork chop from there, and then across the street where the office is. So all of that is a lot more development that's available, and that in itself is an incentive.
Well, but when you're talking about trying to maximize your building footprint and how many units you can get in, and are you going to make a wider sidewalk, or are you going to get an extra 100 square feet of building in there? I don't know.
But they could go up.
Yeah.
But could you give them incentive to do these things by giving them a higher FAR, or less of a parking requirement, or
Yes.
if
Those are all the things that I think we're talking about with the zoning.
You could certainly reduce the parking requirement. I mean, I think we're up against a pretty significant barrier. We've had some recent conversations with commercial developers where the retailers' expectations of parking needs and access to their stores is up here. I mean, you know, contemporary planning practices down here, I would say our boss, to some extent, and other municipal officials is closer to the retail expectation. So I think we're kind of leading the charge at saying, look, you don't need that much parking space. And anytime you go around Brattleboro now, I think, particularly in the sort of suburban style developments, so the Price Chopper parking lot, this time of year is not a good time of year to look. I would say it's pretty busy now, but between Thanksgiving and Christmas it is. But then even now, the kind of informal car yard thing is still happening in the front of the Price Chopper parking lot. That could be filled with people who are willing to walk all the way to the supermarket from there pretty easily, or it could be a 3-story building, and whoever wants to park to visit somebody either in the residential section of that building or the retail is going to park up back, you know, in the existing Price Chopper parking lot. So,
But it's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
how often that parking lot is just jammed full of cars. I mean, not the front portion there.
right.
And I think that does make for a real potential
Right.
for a building. But, you know, it's the most crowded parking lot, I think, other than the Harmony lot in town. The most consistently crowded parking lot, I would say. I go there sometimes when I think it's not going to be busy, and it is. You know?
Right.
And that's without Blockbuster having anything in it right now, right?
Right,
Empty.
right. It's being refit for something, but I
Yeah.
don't know what.
Yeah.
Walgreens lot, you know, it's probably a third to a half full. It's
Right.
never
That's
really,
right.
really full. There's a big parcel of land behind it that, you know, if the whole parking thing turned into a total crisis, you know, there's a parcel behind Walgreens along Fairground that, you know,
Well, and that whole you know,
Yeah.
in the Price Chopper lot, the whole section near the motel
yes.
is usually empty. I mean, there
Right,
is a whole
which is sort of
part
peculiar.
there.
It's just right there. It's
Yeah,
just
it's
at
so
the
much
end of the lot.
closer, but-
So,
Well, I mean, if we want a more urban form in these areas, we want it to be more walkable, then it's a trade-off we're going to need.
right, and I think
mean,
you could even envisage on-street parking on Canal Street at that point.
what about like covered? I know nobody wants to pay for covered parking, but is there a way
Parking
to?
structures.
Well, not necessarily parking structures, but if you can do that underneath, you do retail on one side and
Yeah.
parking structure on the other, like where all the loading is. Why should that count towards? We're trying to encourage infill.
Right.
Why should that count towards your building square footage?
I think we should look at those kinds of things. I mean, I
Yeah,
think,
are we talking about basically changing the zoning rules in the future? Is that basically what we're talking about?
We're going to do the master plan, and then we're going to address the
we're
zoning.
going to rewrite the entire document.
Okay, that's the next, after we do the town plan? we're
Next,
at
that's
the- Gary, you mentioned something called a capital plan. What is that?
The capital plan is the plan that the town has where projects or, in some cases, it's maintenance, but big expenditures are listed year by year. And, you know,
Okay.
it's a big document.
Yep.
And so things that, for instance, that would be bonded, and would go to town meeting for approval, would be listed on there.
Okay.
And as they come up, and so,
So when that comes up, is there any, because it sounds like we don't have anything to do with that, is there any mechanism for people to look at the town plan when those kinds of decisions are being made?
well, that's what we're talking about,
Okay.
is we're talking about trying to synchronize
Okay,
to the extent feasible,
Okay.
the capital plan and the town plan, so that one doesn't call for something that the other doesn't call for.
And again, so the town plan doesn't have the power, if you like, as a document
Mhm.
to stipulate what the capital plan is. It can suggest and recommend, but it can't. It's not a budgetary document. It doesn't have that status. The capital plan, is a prudent management tool for the select board and for municipal officers to follow, and it gets reviewed at town meeting as part of the budget. And so its process, just in terms of those sort of things, is a little bit separate from the way the town plan gets put together and then it's reviewed by the select board. But
So the approval of the capital plan,
Mhm.
really, they could completely go, there's nothing to stop anybody from completely going against the town plan
right,
at this point in history.
and so any effort at coordinating both those things is useful. And I think that there's in principle acknowledgement on the part of town manager and others, and even the select board, that these two documents should coincide, recognizing the limits of one and the advantages of another. And then the only other thing is, again, because of the nature of the community, the capital plan is really devoted to replacing capital items that we already have when their expected life is approaching at the end.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're talking about very large and complex pieces of apparatus like the wastewater treatment plant or something, or although that's not part of the capital plan because it's separate. But
Like fire engines, we
Yeah, very large
voted
fire
on
engines.
those at town
With the new
town
police and
meeting.
fire department.
then exactly those kinds of long-term commitments, but mostly it's shaped around replacement rather than expansion. So.
Okay.
So there's a schedule, and there's a schedule of debt payments, and sort of a theoretical kind of headroom, if you like, between what we're paying monthly and then what our credit allowance would be if we spent it all.
Mhm.
And
Do they tear down, if they build a new fire station, do they tear down the existing and build new?
that's a very interesting
We
question.
only have 15 minutes.
And we don't know the answer to that right now. There's a firm of architects out of Montpelier that are looking at various feasibility. The firm is doing a feasibility study, and it includes rehabilitating the existing downtown firehouse, expanding it, because the apparatus is now bigger than the firehouse. That's part of the challenge. The trucks don't fit in anymore.
Oh,
And that will continue to be a problem. So there's those kinds of issues, but I don't think anyone's kind of gotten to it. There's no draft document or anything yet.
Has that study been started? Is that?
Oh, yeah.
It's underway now?
Yeah, it is underway. There's various scenarios that we can talk about some other time. Unless,
when they do a study like that, I mean, that would be a pretty opportune place to put more housing on top of it.
on top of the
Right.
existing firehouse,
Yeah, that would be
feel
awesome.
like, what, with the firehouse
Glass
underneath still?
garage doors. Well, okay, so
don't the
that,
firemen stay in the firehouse?
They do.
no, oh, so,
They have little places where they live up there.
They
Yeah,
sleep there.
firemen stay
They
overnight in the
sleep there.
firehouse.
well, yeah, I know that, but okay, so would they find a new site?
Not necessarily.
Not
No.
necessarily.
Okay.
You're saying if that
Still-
site's
Still to be
vacated.
determined. If they're going-
There is one scenario where that site's vacated,
Byron,
and the police department vacates the first floor of this building, and they go to a purpose-built joint structure. That's one scenario. And then there are multiple other scenarios that are more complicated than that, like rehabbing this building to continue to accommodate the police, rehabbing the existing downtown firehouse, eliminating the West Brattleboro firehouse, or rehabilitating that firehouse.
See, now that's an opportunity. Municipal facilities, sorry to backtrack, but if you build these buildings knowing that you're going to outgrow them or things are going to change, it seems like putting in that extra 10% to build the building so you can put something on top of it or change the use in the future. That seems like a good way to recoup your costs.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's too many people who want to share their residential space with a fire truck, but
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying.
Right.
When you start allocating
yeah.
money for facilities and placement and use and construction, and it just seems like,
Right. I think there's, I
especially in a dense urban area
Right.
like Brattleboro downtown.
right.
Well, I think one of the, I mean, from our minutes and our discussion at last meeting, kind of the takeaway for me of all that was that we can stand to have just what Rod just said, the headroom between what's being spent now and what could possibly be spent, and looking at the capital plan and the town plan and seeing what takes us up to there, you know.
The police fire complex would take you right to the
Would
limit.
take us right up there, yeah.
Yeah, we'd be at our monthly maximum.
And so that would be like, that would be a big, that is a big question, and that's
Right.
a prime question, and all that is like, is there going to be that, or are there going to be other things, you know? And so I don't know, you know, if the people who make those decisions, like the select board, would welcome the participation of the planning commission or not, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure what's being structured around that conversation at all. It's the capital plan as it stands now, including a kind of a theoretical allocation for the upgrade of the police fire facilities is being discussed now as part of this year's budget process. And the capital plan comes up as a kind of a topic. And the finance committee, which is appointed at town meeting, has been present for those discussions, and that will report back to town meeting. But I'm not sure that there's a really clear sort of decision-making process where people are going to be invited to comment on the feasibility study or what they're...
Oh, really?
Not sure about what's... if you want, I can find out. I'm not sure what's proposed there.
Well, I think even just in light of what we might put in the town plan, it would be good to use that as an example of,
Right.
you know, for instance, if there's difficult decisions to be made and they can be spread around a little bit, and I don't mean, you know, we would take on the responsibility with the select board. I'm just saying that,
Right.
you know, it's a good thing to spread those kinds of things around, I think, and get consensus. If you have to make a difficult decision, you know, I don't know. Seems like the more town consensus that there is, the better
Right.
in the end.
Right. Okay.
But, so that would be a good example, I think.
Right.
Probably the biggest example we have facing us.
For a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe for a really long time.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
But that would make both documents stronger.
seems like it would, yeah.
I would think
Yeah.
that's why that the planning commission should be thinking about it. That the way to reinforce the capital plan and have it more likely to be implemented, and the way to reinforce the reality check, if you like, aspect of the town plan is to read it against what's in the capital plan.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
right, and as we get closer towards the end, we'll get clearer about the kinds of requests that are kind of buried in the town plan that could have capital plan consequences, and be able to sort of break those out and identify them. And some of them may survive and some of them may not, is my suspicion. But,
Okay.
That little pocket is a really ripe area for redevelopment, though, because you've also got the custom laundry, which is vacant, and on the back side of the hill, those two distressed white buildings
Yeah.
that I think were almost condemned a few years ago. Is that right? There was some issue I remember reading about.
I think the blue top saved them.
The blue tarp saved them. I mean, I realize, I know what you're saying. You wouldn't want to live right above a fire department in response
do.
to Timberley, but you know, they don't necessarily have to be. I do, yes. It's not bad.
Feel safe?
I feel very safe.
Yeah.
But you know, if the whole area is redeveloped, you're not necessarily living right on top of it
Right,
or right next to it
right.
in a bad way.
Yeah, I think that is
There's
it.
grade changes there that would allow for.
Yeah, you could do some cool stuff there because you've got multiple levels with multiple streets,
Yeah, there's a
and
lot
it's
of-
something that's probably going to happen in the next 10 years. And as much as we might wax and wane about how development might take place in other areas of town, this is one thing where we know something's going to happen
Yes.
before the next town plan.
Right. I think it is an interesting neighborhood. There's some challenging grade changes and other things in there, as Liz pointed out, but it's, yeah.
Not to mention, you have probably the highest density of senior citizens right next door that are ripe for service.
And then if you
know
go
what
down
senior
Elm Street, I
citizens
don't
are,
know
don't
if
you?
the...
Yeah, right. That's the politically correct term.
I mean,
Yeah.
you go.
And you have an area that's at a crossroads as far as crime goes. I mean, there's a ton of stuff, of pressure on that little pocket
Yeah,
that
There is.
development could address in a meaningful way.
right. Okay.
And it's it's a place where a lot of the most recent projects have happened. You know, the youth theater
Parking
is right a
garage.
block away, the parking garage is right
Yeah.
there.
It's right on the edge of a fairly intense neighborhood of development as well.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you, James.
But then again, like, what do we do?
Can you give up air rights on top of the municipal building? You get a I mean, honestly, that's a good way to make money. Tax dollars?
Well,
Give up the air
sometimes,
rights for
sometimes what we
500
can
feet.
do, I think, is just mention it.
I don't think air rights in Brattleboro hold a lot of economic value except above Hannaford's. That's the only place I know where air rights are actually specified in any kind of legally binding document.
Why would that be?
Because
Above
it's-
Hannaford's.
Because you can see it from 91.
You can see it from 91, you can see it from Putney Road, and
Oh.
Hannaford's has the right of first refusal over any sign between Putney Road and the back of that structure, the entire length. And so
Wow.
it's the only air rights language I know of that affects Brattleboro. This is not New York City.
How about at Panda North?
Oh, that's not economic, that's cultural value.
No, that's culture, all right. Now that's culture.
I heard it's changing its name.
Yeah, to Princess
Princess
Panda.
Panda.
We're trying to figure out what's going to happen to the tea house sign.
What?
I'm sure it's going to stay.
Princess
I
Panda.
know.
Wow.
Does that mean
It's all
it's
women
changing
who are gonna...
hands?
I think it's
No,
the
Are you
same
serious?
family, but it's all women. That's what
It's
I
the
read.
younger generation too, I think.
Yeah, younger
taking over.
generation in the same family, but it's all women.
What about Roger?
I don't know who Roger is.
He's the younger generation,
What
too.
about Roger?
I don't know what happened to him.
You mean not a princess?
Roger Ribbit?
Huh?
I don't know.
Best not to speculate.
Yeah, right. I'm
Oh.
going to leave this topic right there.
So, anything else that anyone would like to bring up or mention or comment on?
You can get Chinese in Putney now.
Wow.
It's a pretty big advance in terms of the quality of life.
And what does the big sign say in front of there?
Nothing.
Putney General Store.
Putney General Store.
Oh, at the Putney General Store? No.
You know, one other thing we didn't address in housing is the waterfront issue. And I'm not sure how that would be addressed, but we have a bunch of housing that encroaches on the waterfront with its parking and,
You mean Main Street? Or
I mean, behind the housing on Main Street where you go down next to,
next to the railroad?
what is the name of that street?
Arch
Arch Street?
Arch Street.
Arch Street, where you go down Arch
Yeah,
Street.
the little dead end street that's very steep.
I mean, I don't think it's a good idea for the long term to have that be a parking lot.
Where are you talking about? Are you talking about behind the Hooker Dunham?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me one of the priorities of the town in the long term is to develop the waterfront.
Oh, and so eliminate the informal parking.
I'm not saying it
Well,
should be eliminated tomorrow, but if we're looking in the long term at that as one of our town's assets.
I don't know if those parking spaces don't come with the buildings. You know that? I bet you they do.
If you rent, you get to use that parking.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
I think, well,
Yeah,
we talked
the
about
own-
that in the land use section,
Right.
James,
Oh,
so.
did we?
But,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good point, but it's something that we need to connect the land use to the housing.
Yeah. I think, yeah. I mean, what I'd say, if I'm hearing you right, James, that there could be some difficult things to work out with making housing on Main Street that takes advantage of the waterfront. That we should address those in the plan. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's right. And all that parking was put in before there was a parking garage a block and a half away.
Oh,
And
right.
it just seems to me that as
Yeah.
we rezone housing, that maybe those places we should consider eliminating the parking rights that are right on the waterfront on that land that has a ton of potential.
Right.
I'm sure the people there watching this would want to kill me right now, but
It's okay, we're not live.
I don't know.
So you'll make it home tonight.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, with the,
You're going to really need the fire department.
with the railroad track
Just
there,
tell
how
the
much,
railroad.
can you do much there? Yeah, with the railroad track there, is there much?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of an interesting project, and it's one of those little. There's a smarty pants like planning term for this. Like there's a little space between two other things. Can't remember what it is, but
purgatory?
Interstitial.
interstitial. That's right. That's right.
It
Oh,
says
she's so quick.
Spartacus,
I like
so
mine.
was
Get it
Josh.
done.
She was so AICP. Interstitial. There you go.
What are
So,
the circles of hell?
all right. The cool planners think it's really fun to plan that stuff. I look at it and I'm a bit baffled about how you'd really go about resolving that, because the railroad tracks really do seem to be that, and the electricity line actually seem to be the
Put
really big headache.
switchbacks behind the Hooper Dunham building all the way down and turn it into a amphitheater. Mini amphitheater.
Well, the way I thought of it was that could eventually be a pedestrian thoroughfare, and you could open up commercial space on the back side there in what was the basements of those buildings.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're talking.
See, I'm not
that
always
sounds
Mr.
interstitial.
Old-fashioned, grumpy, don't develop
okay.
anything.
Ooh.
It's kind of like
Interstitial
a
solution you
commercial
got there.
alley.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if it was paved or whatever, and it was sort of like pedestrian-y,
You know, I'm not saying we should develop it one way or another, but I'm saying that it's a bad idea to have housing taking advantage of that space when there's ready parking that doesn't encroach into spatial
Okay.
potential.
okay. And so when the train went by, you just put your hand over your drink or something. It's like,
Yeah, how many trains go through there? Besides, it's kind of quaint.
We want a lot of trains to go through there, though.
high speed.
Oh, they're not going to be going high speed through.
Well, when the promenade goes in, that'll be a whole new
Okay.
scene.
Station's right next door.
That's right. To
That's
make
gonna
make you feel better, James. The state of Vermont is aware now that New Hampshire proposes a new bridge, which is a big breakthrough. And there's
Proposes?
no there. What's that?
Back on the
You
line.
said
New
when,
Hampshire's proposing a new
Yes,
bridge.
New Hampshire's proposing a new bridge, a sleek, modern design. I'm serious, a sleek, modern design.
what, since when?
They think within 5 years, and
Oh, it's back?
and
within 5 years?
the VTrans has to do the environmental assessment, and if I understand the minutes correctly, they're proposing to do that by the end of June next year,
Oh my gosh.
which
Wow.
they would have to keep with the 5-year schedule.
Huh.
So that goes to your whole waterfront thingy right there.
Bring back Island Park on the island with the old bridge. Boom.
Baseball.
Do want to remind you that that island is New Hampshire.
Well, it's not the island's fault.
Okay, no gun laws.
Okay.
Firecracker.
On that note,
Firecracker.
motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
See how seriously I took that?
Thank you.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Did you see that?
Okay.
Did you see the minutes from?
Wow.